Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into the science of context. Ever wonder why you subconsciously swap out your entire vocabulary when you go from messaging your best friend to emailing your boss? Well, today we are digging into the hard data behind those exact choices. Here's our roadmap for today. 1. The first million words. 2. The mathematics of language. 3. Defining the situational context. 4. Field, tenor, and mode. And finally, 5. Social media versus academia. Starting with Section 1, the first million words and the birth of corpus linguistics. To really understand how we study language today, we have to start with an incredibly audacious project from the mid-20th century. We're heading back to 1961, way before the era of supercomputers and digital text. 1,014,312. That staggering number is the exact word count of the Brown University Standard Corpus of present-day American English, better known as the Brown Corpus. It was the very first major, structured collection of varied language genres. See, before this, studying language on a macro scale was kind of just theoretical. This massive dataset finally set the bar for scientifically studying the frequency and distribution of the words we use every single day. Now, compiling 1 million words today is a piece of cake, right? Just download a couple of ebooks. But back then, this was a monumental effort. Funded by about $23,000 from the U.S. Office of Education, researchers Henry Kuchera and W. Nelson Francis spent years painstakingly compiling this data. I mean, they literally had to manually enter this data onto punch cards using uppercase-only key punch machines, all just to establish a baseline for everyday language use. And you have to admire their thoroughness here. They didn't just grab 1 million words from one random source. To make it a true standard sample of American English, they pulled 500 individual samples, each over 2,000 words, spread across these 15 specific genres. They pulled from absolutely everywhere. Daily press microfilms, detective fiction, scientific humanities, even random magazines from a secondhand store in New York City. The goal was to perfectly mirror the distribution of published American English in 1961. Which brings us to Section 2. The mathematics of language, and finding patterns in all that data. So once you actually have 1 million painstakingly typed words, you can start running the math to see how language behaves in the wild. And the results they found completely shook up the field of linguistics. See, researchers didn't just count the words. Over the next few years, they manually applied part-of-speech tags to the entire corpus. They used about 80 different tags, like CC for coordinating conjunctions or NN for singular nouns, to map out the grammatical anatomy of the texts. Since computer tagging was super prone to errors back then, this meant endless manual proofreading. But mapping these tags allowed for some seriously sophisticated statistical analysis. By mapping those tags and running the numbers, they uncovered something pretty wild. Out of a total vocabulary of about 50,000 unique words in the Brown corpus, roughly half of them were what linguists call hapax legomena. Basically, that means about 25,000 unique words appeared exactly one time in the entire million-word dataset. It just goes to show how incredibly vast and unpredictable human vocabulary really is, even within a structured sample. But on the flip side of that, we have Zipf's law. This shows us that language also follows strict mathematical curves, where a tiny handful of words do the vast majority of the heavy lifting. Get this. In the Brown corpus, the word the alone makes up nearly 7% of the entire dataset. Throw in to and of, and you've just accounted for roughly 13% of all written language in the sample, with just 3 words. It's a perfect hyperbola of frequency. Moving on to Section 3, defining the situational context, where we move from raw data to applied theory. Because here's the thing, raw data, word frequencies, grammatical tags, they don't actually explain why we choose certain words in specific environments. To figure that out, we have to look past the text itself and into the context of the situation. Think about your own daily routine for a second. Have you ever noticed how you use an entirely different vocabulary, a different sentence structure, a totally different tone when you're emailing your boss versus texting your best friend? You're speaking English in both, but the shift in your language is unmistakable. The brilliant linguist M.A.K. Halliday, building on the work of his teacher J.R. Firth, formalized this exact phenomenon. He called it register. He explained that any linguistic situation differs in 3 key ways, and those specific variables are what dictate our grammatical and vocabulary choices. Essentially, a text has to be placed in its living environment before it can be truly understood. That leads us right into Section 4, Field, Tenor, and Mode, Halliday's 3 variables of context. Let's dig into Holiday's framework because, honestly, once you grasp these three variables, you're going to start seeing them everywhere in your daily communications. He broke down the context of literally any situation into these three essential pillars: field, tenor, and mode. If you evaluate a communicative event through these three steps, you can perfectly predict and analyze the type of language or the register that will be used. Let's break them down one by one. First up is the field. The field of discourse is all about the activity itself. What is actually happening? For example, the highly restricted, specialized terms used during a hospital ward round immediately set the linguistic field. If someone starts using terms like case note or patient triage, those words point directly to the social action taking place. It defines whether the language is going to be everyday and non-technical or restricted and specialist. Next, we have the tenor. Tenor dictates the social dynamic and the relationship between the people communicating. You evaluate this on a few different scales. Are you speaking to an equal or a superior? That's your power dynamic. Are you speaking to a stranger or someone you love? That's your affective emotional involvement. Do you talk to them every day or just once a year? That's frequency of contact. All of this dramatically alters the register you choose. Finally, there's the mode. Mode refers to the physical transmission of the message. Is it written down, typed out, or spoken aloud? The mode is heavily influenced by distance. For instance, spatial distance asks whether immediate feedback is possible between the addresser and addressee, like the difference between a real-time face-to-face conversation and reading a printed book. And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, Social Media versus Academia, a modern comparative register analysis. All right, let's take these historical data points and theoretical frameworks we've been talking about and apply them to the ultimate modern contrast. We want to see how register completely shifts grammatical data in our modern lives. To do this, we're turning to a fascinating 2025 study published in the Berkeley Journal of Humanities and Social Science by researcher Oladape Kolo. This study directly compared the linguistic registers of social media messages on one hand and academic writing on the other to see exactly how our grammar adapts to these two drastically different situations. When we evaluate these two mediums, we can clearly see Halliday's field, tenor, and mode at play. Just think about it. Social media messages are private, they're heavily interactive, they share equal power dynamics between friends, and they're emotionally driven, what linguists call having an attitudinal purpose. Academic writing, however, it's public, it's non-interactive, planned, and entirely factual, dealing with highly technical, specific topics. These situations literally could not be more different. And look at how beautifully this translates directly into the hard data, just like the corpus linguistics we looked at earlier. Because academic writing focuses on a factual, informational field and mode, it relies heavily on nouns for dense information delivery. But social media? Its conversational, equal tenor nature means it heavily favors verbs, adverbs, and pronouns. The data perfectly highlights that social media language is fast-paced, action-dependent, and highly personal. The situation physically alters the grammatical anatomy of the text. So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Every single time you open your mouth or pull out your phone to type, you are acting as a master of contextual mathematics. You are constantly, instinctively shifting variables of field, tenor, and mode to select the perfect linguistic register without even realizing it. So what invisible rules will govern your very next text? Keep an eye on the words you choose today. They say a lot more about your situation than you might think. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.